Okay, Dr. Chance, welcome to True Hope Cast. Thank you so much for being with me today, for being with us. How are you? What's going well?
Oh, everything's going well. Just got back from vacation, was floating around the southern seas and around Tahiti for 2 weeks and just pretending to be a fish. And hopefully the fish wouldn't realize that I was, not a predator and just let me float with them for a while. So got to see the Southern Cross being in the Southern Hemisphere and the Milky Way, and chilled out and got my batteries recharged to come back to finish out the year.
Beautiful. That sounds lovely. Lovely. Well, can you let us know a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do, please?
Sure. So I am a chiropractor, and I come from a 4-generation chiropractic family. Actually, my grandmother and grandfather started Palmer College of Chiropractic 100 years ago this year. So in 1922, they started chiropractic college, and then my father and my uncle both became chiropractors. Myself, my older brother, and my younger brother are both chiropractors. 2 of my sons are chiropractors and 2 of my nephews. And I have a cousin in Australia. And then my one son, who's a chiropractor, married a chiropractor, a lady chiropractor. So we have, I think we all drank the Kool-Aid. We all said we were going to do different things. I was going to law school and going to be a United States senator, and my son was going to go to medical school. And whatever draws us to things and is what is in our essence. We were all drawn back to chiropractic, and I'm glad every day that that's what I'm doing. So the traditional chiropractic practice is mostly structurally oriented, but D.D. Palmer, when he wrote the book, The Chiropractic Adjuster in 1910, said besides structure, there is also biochemicals, what he called toxins, and also autosuggestion, which is emotional. And so applied kinesiology, which is the way I evaluate systems, believes in this triad of health: structure, chemical, and emotional. And imbalances can come from any one of those sides of the triad. You can name any condition. I can tell you a structural reason, I can tell you a chemical reason, and I can tell you an emotional reason.
How do those 3 things align with like conventional medicine, especially that emotional piece?
Well, what happens, I think the main problem with modern medicine today is over-specialization. Used to be in the United States back in the 1950s, you had a family doctor. He knew about you. He knew about your kids. You lived in a small community. He knew your crop was late, your mortgage was due, and your kid was in jail. He knew something about what was going on with you. Now, these days, what happens is you have all these specialists. You go in, you say, my right elbow hurts. And they say, well, we need to have you see the orthopedist. Well, you're also getting some radiation of pain down the arm. Well, you probably need to see the neurologist. But, well, it's swollen too. Well, you probably need to see the rheumatologist. And, besides that, I've got some digestive upsets. So they get you to the gastroenterologist. And if nobody can figure you out, they assume that it must be in your head, and they send you to, the psychologist. So there's nobody traditionally that's looking at the whole picture. And so I see my place in this whole system is somebody who sits back and listens. And in one of my forums, it says, when's the last time you felt good? And what was happening? Were you going through a divorce? Were you starting a new medication? Did you have a trauma? And so often you can see when a particular problem starts, there is an aggravating factor that triggers it. Now, I also believe in what's called genetics and epigenetics. I think each of us, when we were born, were given a hand of cards by our parents, who got their hand of cards from their parents, who got it from their parents. And so there's tendencies to have depression, there's tendencies to have anxiety, there's tendencies to diabetes, there's tendency for all of these things to occur based on the genetics you were given. But then what happens is they may lie dormant and not cause a problem until something comes along and triggers them. And so there's an interesting, they always thought that the nuclear material around the cell that wasn't part of the cell itself, they even labeled it DNA junk. And they now know that that DNA junk is 4 million switches that turn on and off the cell. And so we think that it is in the hypothalamus where these switches get turned off because of some type of stressor, a chemical stress, an emotional stress, or a physical stress.
That's super interesting, and I wanted to certainly talk about the hypothalamus. 'Cause I know that's a lot of your passion, a lot of your work goes into that, especially with something called the hypothalamic reset technique.
Correct. Yes.
And I find it so interesting in regards to your what you're saying to me about the how we've specialized so much that it's actually severed that doctor-patient relationship. Because yeah, as you were saying, like I think that's so fascinating that when we were in smaller communities, your doctor would certainly know about the intricate parts of your life, which
Right.
without question change your emotional experience and therefore your physical body as well. So very, very interesting point that is. But before we jump into the HRT, can you just lay the foundation, the groundwork for me in regards to like what is the hypothalamus, why it's important, and then maybe you can reconnect a little bit about that the junk DNA switches on and off piece you were just referring to.
Sure. So the hypothalamus is called the brain of the brain. The things it controls is amazing. This isn't my idea. You can look up WebMD, any of the medical journals. And what it does, it controls neurotransmitters, it controls moods, it controls appetite and digestion, it controls the endocrine system, thyroid, pituitary, adrenals, it controls sleep cycles, it controls anxiety, depression, it controls so many things. And so when these switches get turned off, that's a term I use, these switches get turned off, then imbalances that were there genetically tend to reappear. What we think happens is probably the best definition is it's cell receptor resistance. Just like with a type 2 diabetic, the insulin may be there, but the body can't utilize it. The cell has been turned off to the utilization of the insulin. We think that also happens with neurotransmitters that would affect depression. We think it happens with mineral absorption. We think it happens with zinc and digestive imbalances. We think that all those food allergies where people can't eat wheat, can't eat dairy, can't eat nuts, can't eat all those things are really an imbalance with the body's ability to digest those foods, and it comes down to zinc. So, and then the endocrine system. We see so many people that will give an example of imbalances that occur when something happens with their cycle. Let's take a woman, a young lady, and she's 14 years old, and she has the genetics of the father of having some ADD, ADHD, neurotransmitter problems. And all of a sudden, the hormonal cycle starts and she becomes hyperthyroid. Medically, they want to destroy her thyroid with Synthroid, put her on, destroy the thyroid with radioactive iodine and put her on Synthroid. And so what has happened is those cell receptors have been turned off to the absorption of iodine. So we reset her neurotransmitters, we reset her iodine, and in one visit, she was normal. She didn't have to have her thyroid destroyed. On the other end, you can have a woman who said, I never felt well after the birth of my second child. What happened? Cell receptor, the body sees this hormonal dramatic change occurring with birth. It thinks the hormones are the problem, and it turns off the switches to the hormones. And so what you have to do is reset the connections for the control of the hormones and the hormones themselves. And we see that all the time when people will tell us, I felt fine until there was an event, a hormonal event, menopause starting, a variety of things like that.
So the hypothalamus being the brain of the brain, and you believe like a lot of the disorders that we see within our culture that are just getting more prevalent are a result of maybe like the body at a cellular level not being able to accept or receive these very normal chemicals, be that neurotransmitters or hormones.
Absolutely. That is the foundation of my belief, is that there's cell receptor sensitivity that is caused by some event. Now, it usually is going to trigger whatever your weak link is. It's like an example, if you took 10 people and you subjected them to stress, and 4 people got headaches and 3 people got ulcers and 2 people got hives, if you took them 20 years later and subjected them to stress, the same people who got headaches would get headaches, the same people who got hives would get hives, the same people who got ulcers would get ulcers. People have a genetic tendency, And so what happens with this is it's not random. Once I know the genetics of the family, I can almost predict what's going to happen, because that's where their weakness lies.
And that's really telling, of course, if you're able to, like, as a family doctor, be able to recognize through generations of the family, like, that's obviously very, very important pieces of information. And we obviously see, you use the example of type 2 diabetes. We see how the body can actually downregulate receptors to not receive and not be able to saturate the cell with insulin, for example, as it like normally would. So we obviously see that phenomenon in the body. And would you say, like, stress is like a prime driver of that downregulation, for whether that is
absolutely.
for yeah.
Absolutely. And it can be emotional stress, it can be chemical stress, or it can be physical stress. It can be any of those things. And what we have, we go back to genetics. I have been in practice 44 years. And in my first year of practice, I noticed genetics. I had a family. We used to have a family plan. If you bring in all 4 members of your family at the same time, I'll charge you one fee. We'll keep you healthy. And in this particular family, the mother and the son looked the same. They had darker skin, they had darker hair, and had every imbalance known to man. They had allergies to wheat, to dairy, to everything. And the father and the daughter looked the same. They looked like they were from Norway. They had light skin, blonde hair, nothing, hardly ever wrong with them. The mother and the son were the same. The father and the daughter were the same. And now we can quantify it. You can look at these genetic symptom surveys. I used to, before I was smart enough to figure out the genetic symptom survey, if there was a very difficult patient, I would say, can you send a symptom survey to your son, to your daughter, to your sister, and let me see what runs in the family. Instead of having to do that, now I have a symptom survey that says, do you have any neurological disorders such as depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD? How about your father's family, mother's family, siblings, or children? And it goes through that for about 8 or 10 different things, including digestion, anxiety, insomnia, thyroid, endocrine issues. And so if you can see what the tendencies are, you can pretty much know where to start, because what we do is like bowling. If you hit the head pin, you get a lot of points. Almost with every patient that comes into my office, I'm going to get points. Sometimes I don't know where the head pin is because I don't have enough information. And so if I have all the information, I'm pretty good at figuring out where it's coming from. But there's often, especially men, tend to be non-disclosers. I asked this gentleman, this was about a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago, if he had any problems with depression and anxiety. And he said, no. And his wife turns to him and says, what do you mean? She says, well, I've got it under control. Well, how about anybody in your family? No. She says, well, how about your sister? She committed suicide because of depression. Your son's bipolar. He's ignoring all of these signs, the clues that would give me what else to do.
Yeah. And so that's wild.
Yeah, it is.
And he's obviously not disclosing that information to you. And
luckily,
within his own reality, like within his own mind, he's probably, not taking that as reality either. So that's a very interesting process for men. I mean, talking about mental health or even sexual health with a man, it's not an easy thing to do in a practitioner sense, right? It's not something that we're super comfortable talking about.
Yeah, I teach this stuff, and I have a symptom survey filled out by Michael from South Florida, and I show that symptom survey, and then I show a symptom survey filled out by Michael with the assistance of his wife. It does not look the same at all. What do you mean you don't have that? You complain about that all the time. So women are taught to pay attention for the most part. I'm making a generalization.
Sure.
Now, but a little boy, he falls down, he's playing soccer, he scrapes up his knee, it's bleeding a little bit. His father rubs the dirt off and says, get back in there. And no pain, no gain, like mentality, football, military mentality.
Sure.
And a little girl, oh, poor baby, come here, let me give it a kiss and put a pink Band-Aid on it. So women are mostly are taught to pay attention to symptoms, and men are taught to ignore them. And I've done it myself. I almost killed myself a few times in athletics, literally, because I've ignored warning signs that the body was trying to give me.
So that example you gave of the the son and I think you said the son and the dad and the mum and the
The
Nordic.
mom and the son and the father and the daughter.
Okay. So and you said the mum and the son were the ones who had all these conditions and all these issues going on, right? So what's the treatment basis there? Like when you've got
This
like
is
that,
40. This is 40 years ago, and
okay.
so I didn't know the hypothalamic reset back then, and so we would do structural corrections. We would give them, because they had a lot of allergies, we'd give them nutritional supplementation to support the liver and adrenals. We would give them those type of things.
Okay.
After a while, I learned allergy elimination techniques, which would add that to the protocol. And then in the past 11 years, that's been supplemented with this hypothalamic reset, which we think is much more powerful in getting to the root of the cause.
Amazing. Well, if you'd be kind enough to just tell us a little bit more about what the hypothalamic reset technique is, where did it come from? Where did that originate? You said you've been working on that for 11 years. It's something I think you've got a book on it, right? Which we can talk about as well.
Yes. So we have a book on it. It was, we've always known that the hypothalamus was important. I did some major work with the fibromyalgia. We have a fibromyalgia video out that teaches chiropractors how to treat fibromyalgia. And we knew that that in about half the cases, the hypothalamus was involved. Now, this is things we did about 15 or 20 years ago. What we now know is in every one of those, the hypothalamus was involved. We just weren't able to figure out how we could bring it to fruition to show it. And so the hypothalamus sits up there trying to make decisions. It's always doing something that it thinks is good for you. The body is never doing anything that it thinks is bad for you. It is trying to heal you 24/7. Every day of the week, every month of the year. And what happens is sometimes it makes mistakes, not on purpose, but just like, let's take autoimmune. What is autoimmune? Body's attacking itself. Why would it do that? Why would it attack itself? It's a mistake. It's just like friendly fire in a battle. So if you're in the foxhole with your friends, who are your comrades, and you're in this war, and all of a sudden a firefight breaks out and there's a lot of smoke and there's no good reconnaissance. The general isn't there to tell you what to do. You're trying to protect yourself. And so you're shooting to protect yourself. And by mistake, you shoot your friend. You didn't mean to shoot your friend. That's what autoimmune is. The body is trying to protect itself. It's made a mistake and it's attacking itself. And it's because of poor communication.
Yeah, is that a state of confusion? Is it a state of when you say like a biological mistake? What are the circumstances in which that may arise? And yeah, if you could touch on that.
Usually happens when the neurotransmitters are not working well. The neurotransmitters are the way that the body communicates. So without the neurotransmitters working, you're in a battle without the general, without the reconnaissance. And so you're going to do whatever it is to try to survive. When you have the neurotransmitters, which is the brain connectors, which is choline, inositol, GABA, biotin, serotonin, that's the number one thing we reset. The most important thing that we do is to get the brain working with you. If the brain is working with you, everything else becomes much, much easier. So that's the first thing I check on everybody, is to make sure their neurotransmitters are intact. And if it's not, I reset those. And so we have a list. We've been doing this now for 11 years. We have a computer program that has been from day one. We have, I think, now 3,500 patients with 25,000 treatments with pre and post symptom surveys in it. So I can tell you what the number one treatment is, the number two treatment. I can tell you how many times I've done anything you mentioned. I can pull up on the computer and say, I've done neurotransmitters 2,500 times. I've done zinc 2,600 times. And I can tell you the top 10, the top 20, everything I've done more than 100 times. And so it's not random. It's not random. Now, again, you may have a skewed result depending on the patients you see. Let's say that you decide to be a digestive specialist and you only want to see digestive disorders. You're going to see a heck of a lot of problems with zinc. If you decide you want to be treat people with ADD, ADHD, the kids are having so much learning difficulties, you're going to see a lot of neurotransmitter problems. if you treat women with hormonal imbalances, you're going to see a lot of thyroid, adrenal dysfunction. So you can have numbers that are distorted based on your particular practice and what it's skewed to. In our chiropractic practice, and in most, probably 75 to 80% of our patients are women. You would think, well, you're a structural guy, you're going to adjust their back, and you're going to see the men because they're going to come in with a hurt back. What's interesting is men tend to only come in. They come in and say, "Doc, I hurt my back yesterday. I'm supposed to play golf tomorrow. Get me straight." Women come in many times and they will say, "I don't know why I'm here. I just don't feel well." Men hardly ever come in with that. So women are much more in tune with just not feeling right. It almost takes a total collapse for men to know that they have a problem. And that it's me included. I was in practice early on in my 4th or 5th year of practice, and I knew I was under stress. I was seeing 250 patients a week. I was working 6 days a week. I knew that there were some things going on. And so I decided to go to a seminar down in South Florida, and I was going to go to the hotel, nice Fontainebleau on the beach, and spend a little time on the beach, go to a couple of seminars, but mainly relax. And so I still worked that morning. I still couldn't give up working that morning. So I drove down and I went in. I thought, well, maybe I'll go for a swim just to relax in the pool. And so I tried to swim in the pool. I couldn't turn my head. I had meningitis. It took me finally to relax to realize I probably had meningitis the whole week.
Wow.
So it is, and it's an interesting statistics. If you look at when people go to emergency rooms, it's often on Friday night. They go through the whole week, they get through it, and they say, "Oh my gosh, I get the weekend to relax." And, "Oh my God, what's this pain? I got an appendicitis attack." So they've had imbalances all week, but the body is pretty good at handling acute stress. And then finally, when it relaxes, it tends to collapse. So the widower will get through the funeral, they'll make it through, and they'll do all those things and make it through, and then they'll collapse. Mm-hmm. Later on, the student will get through finals and get sick over Christmas break. The body is really good at handling acute stresses. And then finally, if it doesn't, not able to release those stresses, then it does collapse.
Interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about how you actually test neurotransmitters?
Sure. So there's a few things that will happen when your neurotransmitters are not working well. All right. So a fluorescent light has a vibration to it rather than an incandescent light that has a constant stream. I have a view box because we used to have x-rays that were film, and I'd put them up. Now we have digital x-rays, and the only reason I use my view box is for testing for the neurotransmitters. If I turn on the fluorescent light and I check a muscle, you'll go weak if your neurotransmitters are not connecting. That's why so many kids have problems in school these days. When I was a kid, there was one kid in my class that had ADD. Now you talk to teachers, it's probably 30%. Why? Because they're under fluorescent lights. We're cramming all this electronic stuff in their brains. When we got home from school, we rode a bike or played football or did something else. Now they come home and get on their iPads. So this electronic bombardment is really stressing our children. And so that's one way. The second way is we do not think there's a problem with the left side or the right side of the brain. We think there's a problem with the communication between the sides of the brain. So if we have a person sing and they stay strong, and they count and they stay strong, and their muscle goes weak when they sing with numbers, then we know there's a misconnection with the connection. So your right brain basically is controlling your musical side of the brain. Your left brain is controlling your arithmetic, reasonable, rational side. So when you try to do both, you're trying to have them both. When you're trying to sing with numbers, you're trying to use both at the same time. And then also this is called neurological switching. As we walk, certain muscles will release. When you step forward with your left foot, your right arm should release to go forward. That's a normal gait response. What will happen in a person whose neurotransmitters are not working is it'll be exactly backwards. The wrong muscles are not releasing. So that's the three tests we see. Then we put neurotransmitters in their hand, and if their body isn't receptive to that, they'll go weak, and then we reset it through the hypothalamus, which is the use of spinal reflex points and acupressure points while they're holding the substance and the hypothalamus, or while they're doing the activity and holding the hypothalamus. So the first thing we would do is we treat them while they're holding the neurotransmitters and hypothalamus. We do the reflex points. And then we would check them while they were reading. Just had one in a couple hours ago. We had her read. She went weak reading. So what did we do? We reset her hypothalamus while she was reading. She also, when she was under multiple stimuli, when a lot of things were going on, I was playing music, I was having a dancing Santa Claus making noise, and I was asking her questions all at the same time. And she said, this is much like my home. I've got 6 kids at home or whatever. I said, maybe not quite as bad, but your brain couldn't take all that information at the same time. So we reset her brain while she was doing that activity.
Wow. And that is an actual, is that like a manipulation? You said acupressure, like you actually
using
making
spinal
contact?
reflex points is a very, very easy tapping points. There's particular ones, T1, T8, T12, L3, and L5. We use a dual-prong activator. You can tap them, and there's 8 acupuncture points. But it's not like a manipulation like you consider a chiropractic adjustment where you're making a thrust. It's not like that. It's stimulating neurological beds along the sides of the spine.
Interesting. That sounds like a much more of like a subtle approach to.
Oh, it's very subtle. People will say, "Have you done anything for me today?" And I'll say, "You'll know. Walk out, see what you notice."
And do you think this is something
and
that
I joke with them because,
sorry, carry on, please.
I was going to say, sometimes people are very desperate. I had this one lady who came in, and she had been through every treatment for 10 years, and her husband had been going around with her, and she was just desperate. And she said to me the first visit, she said, if you don't help me, I'm going to commit suicide. I've tried before, but I haven't been successful this time. I will. And so within 2 visits, she's doing much better. And so her husband corners me, and I said, I know she's doing much better. How do you know, Doc? It's not psychological. And I said, it could be. And just tell them up front, whatever you think. My psychological visit is double my regular visit. So if you think, you can pay double if you want. Just joking with them. But so people will know, it looks like what we do should not have that much of a dramatic effect. And I understand that. And that's why I had an opportunity. It was about a year and a half ago. I had a person who specializes in neurology be willing to drive up 4 hours round trip to do some pre and post testing on a patient of mine that I'd never treated before. And so David, who was 42 years old, had ADD and ADHD, he had depression, he had anxiety, he had insomnia, he had GERD and ulcerative colitis. He was a freaking mess. And so the neurological specialist did all this brain mapping and did also reaction times, how quickly he could react. And then he tested him for an hour and a half. And then I did my treatment, which lasted 20 to 30 minutes, and he retested him. He said the results I got in that 20 or 30 minute treatment, if he had been treating the patient for 2 or 3 months, he would have been happy with those results. So a lot of the stuff we do doesn't look like it should work. But if it's the problem, it works. And that's, what you always have to say. You talk about, do you treat this or do you treat that? I do not treat anything. I don't treat any disease. I just treat people who have diseases. So you have a patient, I don't treat thyroid issues, but a patient has an imbalance that's affecting their thyroid. I remove blocks and let the body try to balance itself. So I don't.
Well, that's super interesting that you say that you had that neurologist come in and you did a 20-30 minute treatment, and he said that would have taken him maybe 2 to 3 months to get to that result. What would he have done in the 2 to 3 months that's different to what you're doing?
Mainly chiropractic work, and he specializes in trying to stimulate brains with other types of activity. He really he's a chiropractic neurologist who would be using lasers and a variety of other things to stimulate brain activity.
Would you describe your technique kind of just because you use the word reset in there, right? Like actually just allowing the body to do what it does best, and just to put it back into its best situation to be able to do that, rather than just trying to change a bunch of different things to try and treat or to try and heal.
I'm not trying to change anything. I'm removing blocks that are keeping the body from making corrections itself.
Yeah.
So think of it like a short circuit. I don't rewire the house. I just find where the short circuit is and reset the circuit breaker. I tell people when they come in, when they're really a mess, think of it this way. Lightning hits your house. Everything's been blown. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to turn on the main circuit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go room to room to see if those circuits are working. Is your computer working? Is your TV working? Is your this? And the rooms that I go to are based on the patient symptom survey and based on their genetics, because it will give me the rooms that are most likely to have the circuits blown.
Interesting. What does the actual is there a lot of literature and research in regards to HRT and disease treatment?
In the HRT, I'm the originator of it, and so the book we just published is one of those things to get it out to the public. I wanted to be pretty secure in the information that we had, and having that many treatments over 10 years, we've been refining it all the time, and we're discovering new things all the time. But to say that, I think the next probably thing that I think would be very interesting is to take an ADD and ADHD kid and do a brain, a motion MRI of their brain, functional MRI of their brain while they're reading. Let me reset them and then test them what the changes are when they're reading. I think that's sort of the near horizon of, although that's not going to be cheap to do.
Sure.
But I think that would be the next horizon. Another thing you could do, you could take 2 classes of kids and you could do placebo treatments on one and not placebo treatments on another. Although I hate to have anybody waste their time with me doing placebo. So I'd rather do, if I'm going to treat somebody, I want to do what I think is best for them. I keep research records, but I'm not a researcher.
Okay.
I'm a clinician who has some research behind it.
Do you think that that your work would meet some maybe resistance in regards to looking to actually do some good quality research behind it? I say that because doing a 20-30 minute manipulation, not manipulation, doing a 20-30 minute reset treatment would be a lot, if that actually worked and showed really, really good evidence, which you already have yourself, but to do that and to make that more mainstream, that would certainly come against, all the medications and other treatments that are being conventionally used for the things that you're treating.
So one of and we tried to do some research with fibromyalgia, and I did do a research study that was published in the Australian Journal and then also republished in the Florida Chiropractic Journal. What I find as a problem is in research, you want to isolate one factor. You just want to have one thing that's wrong, and you just identifying that one little part. So that person that has ADD, they need to have their neurotransmitters reset. They probably need to be reset while they're reading, while they're writing, while they're doing math. They probably need to be on B12. They probably need to be doing an inositol. They probably need to do an exercise cross-crawl patterning. So what I'm really testing is not one single factor. I'm checking a protocol. And that's what I did with fibromyalgia. I said, all I am doing is one of these 2 cranial faults, an anterior atlas, and using one of these 5 nutrients. And that is it. That's my protocol. And I can show you dramatic results with a protocol. I think it is hard to prove holistic medicine because in basic research, you're only looking for one factor. I think it's bigger than that. And so I think I'm going to maybe make a structural adjustment. I'm going to make a chemical adjustment. I'm going to make an emotional adjustment. I'm going to do a protocol that can be limited, but I think to prove holistic treatment using a single entity testing is a mistake.
Do you think that everybody could benefit from having a hypothalamic reset?
I don't know that everybody needs it. I have people that I've tested that don't need it. There are very few people who have serious imbalances that don't need it. There's There's no child who has ADD that does not need it. There's nobody who has anxiety that does not need it. There's nobody who has a variety of things, hormonal stuff, that does not need it. So there are people who are doing fine, don't need chiropractic adjustments, don't need better nutrition, don't need anything else, but they're rare. And it's also too, is what health is a continuum. All right. So health, somewhere between 0 and dead and 10 perfect health, is a 3. 3 and below is what is known as disease. And that's what we focus on. We focus on disease. Let's say you're at a 7. Are you healthy? Yeah, you're healthy. But are you as healthy as you should be? So that's why a symptom survey differs than looking at just the thyroid function. I'm looking at the tendencies for the thyroid to be in balance. And so when I tell a patient that I'm finding some imbalances with the thyroid, they'll say, well, and I've been to the thyroid doctor and they say it's fine. I said, yeah. How do you feel? Look at your symptom survey. You feel tired and you feel wired. Your thyroid hormone is okay, but it's not getting into the cell. I'm going to reset your RNA and see how you feel. Were they in a disease state? No. Eventually, they would have gotten into a disease state, and then the thyroid expert would have done something. They would have put them on Synthroid or some other medication. But what I'm really dealing with is in the health realm. I am trying to make people healthier. And once they get into a disease state, they may need modern medicine. But there's so many people that could be so much healthier than they are right now.
Yeah, it's remarkable the amount of people that will go to maybe extreme lengths of going immediately to a pharmaceutical or even a surgery or something like that before, a lot of people don't even know that these types of options exist. And that's kind of why we're having these conversations, to spread the word, to spread the information that there are some quite wonderful, powerful things that we can do that are a lot less invasive to the human body. And it makes total sense that you'd be taking this holistic approach and having using these symptom surveys to completely assess somebody's emotional state, psychological state, and physical state. So important that we're actually taking that type of approach to medicine.
We have so many patients that are on medications. I had one in just this week, 16 different medications.
Wow.
Her kidneys is overloaded to try to get rid of the toxicity. The liver is under stress. She hasn't gotten into a disease state yet, but I don't know if the problem exists in Canada like it does in the United States, but there are so many prescription medications given. The United States uses 75 to 80% of the world's prescriptive drugs, and yet we score 16th out of 16 industrial countries in our health index. I mean, medications are needed, but we are overusing them. I mean, they give you something for everything. I had a lady in just the other day, her cholesterol was a little elevated, 209, but her HDL is great. She had a great ratio. They wanted to put her on statins. Mm-hmm. I mean, we go overboard. And so I think that if we were able to reduce the amount of medications, there are some that people have to stay on life-sustaining medication. I never tell anybody to get off any medication. That's not in my license. That's not what I do. And what I do is I balance them as best I can. I say, now go to your medical person and ask them how you can phase off, which ones are absolutely necessary, which ones can you try without, and let's get you off of this stuff, because there is no medication that does not have some effect on the body's elimination systems and toxicity. Even I had a guy in here, he was in end-stage kidney failure, over-the-counter Excedrin. You would think something over-the-counter can't cause you kidney failure. Just Excedrin for headaches. Wow. So these people are taking these powerful medications. They don't even think twice about popping these pills all the time. And because, I've got this, my doctor said it's good for me, I need to take it. And I think that more and more doctors, and it's a small part right now, but more and more doctors are becoming more holistic and trying to say, let's try to get you healthier. Let's not just automatically put you on a medication. But there are doctors out there that think statins should be in the water. It should be like fluoride. Everybody should be taking a statin. And it's one of the drugs that we see most of the side effects from. Weakness in the legs, inability to walk, tired all the time. And they say, well, I'm just getting older. Yeah, you weren't that old 2 years ago before you started the statin. And so I don't take them off the statins, but I get them on some nutritional support to help with the kidneys elimination of toxicity, and then ask them to go have their cholesterol tested and talk to their doctor about getting them off unnecessary medications.
How do you think we've got into a position where patients, or let's just say pharmaceutical consumers, are just willing to take something over the counter without thinking about the potential side effects or something like that? Like you're talking about this kidney disease just then. Like, how have we got into a position where we're not asking better questions?
I think there's a trust, and if you go into a doctor's office, I think if you ask the person, are you going to get something for your problem? They would say yes. They expect to get a prescription. Here's your problem. Here's a prescription. This will take care of you. And so if you come in with a complaint, let's say it's a headache, we're going to give you a medication for your headache. All right. Instead of figuring out why you've got a headache. And so it's much easier for the doctor, if he's got a busy schedule and he's going to spend 5 minutes with you, he writes a prescription, here's something for the headache, or for your back pain or anything like that. I can tell you your headache is not due to excedrin deficiency. I don't think anybody has an excedrin deficiency. We think it is caused by another imbalance, and it is harder to figure out why those other things are happening. And I think it's better for the patient to figure out, well, this all started happening. I had a guy come in, always had headaches. We would have thought if it was a woman, we would have thought it was menstrual cycle, because about the 15th of the month, he would always come in with these headaches. And so what we finally figured out, he was an auditor of the company, and they were doing the books and auditing at that time. It was all related to stress. And so what you had him do is say, okay, this time of month, you don't get enough exercise anyway, but this time of the month, you've got to get out and walk every day. You've got to, take some extra B12 for your brain, helping neurotransmitters, but you need to exercise to dissipate the stress. What can you do to get you feeling better so you don't have to become dependent on a medication?
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Before we finish up, can you tell us a little bit about your book, The Power of the Hypothalamus, please?
Sure. I got it right here. Power of the Hypothalamus. All right. And it's available on Amazon. And of course, people buy it in my front office and type of stuff. It is, I think, an easy read. We intentionally made it not for a doctor, but for a patient. It is patient stories. And so people will go along. The developer of neuroemotional technique, Scott Walker, I do a lot of emotional work. When I sent him the book and he was reading through it, his first reaction was exactly what I wanted other people. My grandson needs this. So he saw something in a story that he saw either in himself or somebody else. And so I actually took out, we worked on this book. When you read the book, you'll say, well, how come it took you 2.5 years to do this book? It's because we took out probably 20 chapters.
Oh, wow.
We took, whenever it started to get a little bit boring, we sent it to a number of different people. We said, okay, what's the purpose of that chapter? Wow, that was really interesting. Well, did it really lead the patient to where they needed to be? And I've had people come in and say, I didn't put it down. I stayed up all night reading it, just because we think it's that interesting that people, when they start reading it, they can see it's stories. And what you need to know is I'm not a writer. I'm a storyteller, but my wife is a writer. And she says, I didn't edit your book. I rewrote your book. She took it and put it into words and then my Wednesday 9 o'clock patient is a New York Times 3 times best-selling author. He wrote the Untethered Soul, Oprah Winfrey's favorite book of the year. And
I've read that.
And he's my 9 o'clock patient. He took the book under his wing, and he would come back and he said, I had to really change this chapter. And I'd look at it and I say, I only see one word change. He said, yeah, but that was a very important word. So they're wordsmiths, you know. I can tell you stories like we're doing today, and I'm pretty good at that. But you know, I kid people that English is my second language. It's supposed to be my first, but knowledge about serial commas and where things are supposed to be is not my expertise. So if you read the book, I think you'll appreciate both my wife and Mickey and how they are craftsmen in putting words together. And Mickey would say, if at any point when you're reading, you have to stop and you're distracted because it didn't make sense, you've lost them. Mm-hmm. And so every word, and so he went through passages. He said, you go through passages. We went through passages in this book 10, 12 times in each chapter. And there was a funny story. My wife took more liberty in one of the chapters that you rewrote, and Mickey came back after reading and said, who wrote this chapter? I said, well, I did, but my wife, it took more liberties, but she said, have her rewrite them all. She said, these are much better. So excellent. I know my limitations, and I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And I'm pretty good at storytelling, and they're much better at writing. And so I think those combinations have made it a pretty interesting book. I think that I have not had anybody who has read it that did not have glowing remarks about what it told them. And you know, it would be, how do patients know that their thyroid can be hyper and hypo at the same time? How can you be tired and wired? How can you be so tired but you can't sleep, you can't relax? Mm-hmm. That's a condition. But medically, they'll never figure it out because your thyroid check's okay on the lab work. And so that's one of the problems that's happened with medicine, is that the gold standard of whether you need to be treated is whether a lab shows you to be off. And so if the lab doesn't show anything, you don't have a problem.
It's a poor metric.
Fibromyalgia went under the screen, under the radar for so long. And, you know, all these patients in the 1950s were getting B12 shots from their doctors, their family doctors. They felt much better. And then a modern doctor came along and said, you don't need it anymore. I can show you your B12 is fine. And I can show you in nutritional almanacs that the level of B12 in the blood and the cell may be different. And so lab work at the exclusion of what the patient tells you is a big mistake. And I think that's one of the mistakes that we make in our evidence-based care. Evidence-based care is not just research. It is what the patient is telling you and what the clinician himself finds to be valuable in that case.
Wonderful. Well, where's the best place for people to connect with you, Dr. Chance?
It's best way, because then you can see the whole sort of thing, is www.chance, CHANCEHRT.com. That will take you to the website. It'll tell you a little bit about me. It'll tell you about the courses for practitioners who want to learn this. It'll tell you to order the kit to do the testing, but it also takes you directly to the Amazon site to order the book.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure that information is in the show notes so people can connect with you. But I want to say thank you so much for coming onto the show and really enlightening us into so many different aspects of chiropractic health, of conventional healthcare, and especially touching more on the hypothalamus and that reset technique. Super, super informative. But thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. It's when you start having me talk about health, it's hard to stop me. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. You've obviously got so much passion and inspiration behind it. So that's really, really cool. That is it. No, thank you. Well, that is it for this episode of True Hope Podcast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. I will make sure that the links to connect with Dr. Chance are in the show notes. I'll put a link in for that book as well, The Power of the Hypothalamus. But don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. You can also leave us a review on iTunes if you feel like you want to do that. But that is it for this week. We'll see you soon.